Hey everyone, welcome back to Lead Score Mondays. It is good to be back. Today's session is all about negative lead scores and how things have changed in the new HubSpot scoring tool. If you've been building lead scoring models in HubSpot for a while, you probably use negative scores to disqualify contacts or to reduce scores based on things like email bounces, inactivities, unsubscribes, or bad fit criteria. But in the new lead scoring tool, things don't work quite the same way. And if you've already tried to rebuild your model, you might have noticed you can't end with a negative score anymore. So today we'll walk through what's different, why HubSpot made this change, what you can do instead, and a few workarounds and examples. And of course, I'll leave time for questions, so feel free to drop them in the chat. I am here solo today, so please drop a hello in the chat too, so that I know I'm not talking into the void. Thank you so much. So a quick refresher on how negative scores worked in the what we'll be calling today old tool. So in the previous tool, it was fairly common to add negative scores to your HubSpot score to kind of remove people. So I would often say negative 500 points if there's a hard bounce on the email. That means that I do not want to keep emailing these people, for example, or they might not be there anymore, things like that. And when you would look at your scores at the end of the scoring, if you will, you would fairly commonly see something like this, negative 200. So people would end with these negative scores. I kind of quickly, I think quickly, noticed when I started rebuilding some scores using the new scoring tool that it was no longer possible to end with a negative score. So if in the new score you're using negative points, it'll just bottom out. So it'll say 0 or it'll say blank basically, but you're not going to get a negative 200 score in the old score. So why does that even matter? Well, if you're using a single score in the new tool, then it kind of doesn't. It'll just say 0 where you were previously doing something, like negative 200, and it doesn't really matter if it's negative 200 or if it's 0. However, where it does matter is if you are using both multiple scores. So I like to set up at least 3 scores, ICP contact fit, ICP company fit, and then recent engagement. Based on those 3 scores, I will combine them to have a total score. However, now that we're not able to use those negative scores, if they're a really bad ICP fit, it's just going to be 0. It's never going to be uh, you know, you can't let a negative ICP fit drop a recent engagement score down, for example. So to say that a little better, maybe I'm scoring 100 points if you reach out through our contact us form or our sales form. And I'm sending everyone with 100 points to sales directly. However, maybe you're a bad ICP contact. For me, I don't do a lot of development work, so I wouldn't want a developer. You know, there's not a whole lot I can offer someone in a developer role or something like that. That's the one I usually use. So I might have a negative contact fit or company fit for that. However, because the contact fit score can never go below 0, I would then still send that recent engagement score to my sales team because it would be 100. Um, you can, again, still negate things. So I can add, this is a fairly common one. If I wanted to say it, web events here. Maybe I wanted to say the URL path contains careers. I can still subtract points, but it's just never going to end up negative. So the reason this matters is really you lose the nuance. You can't easily separate a bad fit from someone with no engagement. This is also a problem if you're trying to completely replicate your current score into the new system. It's not going to look the same, and it's also just something to consider as you are rebuilding. The client that it came up with specifically, we had a whole separate score for negative scores. And I pretty quickly realized that my negative score was just 0, so it wasn't negating anything. If you're in a similar situation where you're breaking negative scores out, then you're going to want to look at that differently. I do, of course, come with a couple of workarounds. Mainly for this, we can still look at subtracting. If you're using a single score, then like I said earlier, subtracting can work for you still. Your bad leads are just going to show up with a score of 0, and that's okay. The main workaround that HubSpot has built into the new tool that was not in the old scoring was this exclusions. So when you're building a score, if you go to contacts, or it would say companies, if you're doing a company score, you can exclude certain contacts or companies from being scored using a list. So any of those criteria that you were using for negative 500, negative 3,000, whatever you were doing, that you just wanted to get those contacts out of the scoring cycle, you can now add those to a list and exclude them. You can only use 5 lists, and I know a lot of companies had more than 5 exclusions. What I have done is I just create a single list that is my score exclusion list, and I roll up any list that I was using or any criteria. So for example, I'll have a score exclusion list, and I will say everybody that is hard bounced ever is on that list. I'll also have all of those job titles that are just bad fits maybe on that list and things like that. So this is the main way to get around the negative scores. However, there are some times where you and I may be using negative scores, and we really want them to behave like a negative score. Actually, this careers page is a great example. Sure, maybe we want to add a little bit of a negative if they visited our careers page, but I don't want to exclude them from the score altogether. They might have just clicked on the page. It's a fairly common use of negative scoring and even exclusions. And I get it, you don't want job seekers necessarily in your cycle, but there's just because they visited your careers page does not mean that they are not your buyer. And so I would be careful about how much you're removing them. So just keep that in mind. But maybe you do want to subtract 5 points or something. But if they filled out your hand raiser form, you might still want to reach out to them if they have the right job title and are at a good company and so on. So consider that as well. So in a single score, it can work fine just as is. You can subtract points. For the client that I had a full negative score for, we're mostly using exclusion lists now in place of that score. So we're excluding all of those contacts that we had negative 100, negative 500, whatever points for. The other thing we're doing is that client is grouping the things like we have some scores for if there has been one marketing soft bounce, but not a hard bounce yet, we might subtract a couple points. Or there's some job titles that aren't our best fit. So for the soft bounces, I would include that in the engagement. So that would take away points from their engagement, which is the same as the marketing bounce would be grouped in, same as like marketing opens and marketing clicks. We're basically taking points from the marketing opens and marketing clicks and subtracting that from the bounces. And then for the job titles, I would put that potentially in my ICP contact fit group. So if I'm scoring if job title contains CEO and if they're in the United States and Canada, maybe I also have a criteria for if country region is equal to, and let's say Australia. So I'll add points for if they're in the US, but I'll subtract one if they're in Australia. Oops, there. In this case, if it's a CEO in Australia, then their points here would just be 0, and that's kind of fair. They're not a total bad fit. If they raise their hand and they ask to work with me, then maybe I will talk to them. But Australia is really far away and the time zone's a little tricky. I've tried it before, but it ends up that I'm working later than expected. So maybe I'm not adding points there. But in this case, if they're in Australia and we don't know their job title, they wouldn't have a -1. They would just be 0. They just wouldn't have a score for my ICP contact fit versus taking away from the other areas. So it's a little bit of a behavioral issue or difference, I guess. If you do still want to take points away, so for example, if I had a CFO in Australia fill out this. In the new system, they would have a score of 0 versus in the old system, they would have a score of -1. So if I did want to do that, what I would do instead is I would create a negative score. This could be an engagement score, a fit score. It's going to depend on the criteria or a combined score. Engagement scores are based on behavioral engagement. So have they visited this page? Have they filled out this form? And fit is going to be based on the properties on their record. The old score was basically a contact fit score in all reality. So this contact engagement score is kind of the new thing. So just consider that when selecting, what are you going to be using for your negative points? If it's all going to be properties on the record, then you'll use fit. If it's going to be things like have they visited the careers page, then it's going to be engagement. And if it's going to be both, then you can use the combined score. If you have access, this is enterprise only. If you don't have access, just create negative engagement, negative contact fit, and that's fine too. For this example, I'm just going to do fit scores. Let's say I'm just trying to recreate my old scoring system. All right, and then here is my negative scoring group. So I'll say if the country or region is equal to Australia. And here, this part's going to be a little tricky, but follow me for a second. For this, we're going to add. So just stay with me. I promise it'll all come together. And then maybe job title is equal to developer, add and then let's just for fun, version All right. So for this example, if the contact is in Australia, if their job title is developer, or if they have a recent conversion containing cancel, maybe I have a form on my website for canceling your subscription or something like that I want to negate people. Maybe that is, but I don't necessarily want to like remove them entirely. This is something you could maybe set up. So for this example, I'm not going to exclude anyone. And I'll just have this be negative fit. That's all good. And I can turn this on. Now let me go back. And I'm going to turn on my ICP contact fit for this example as well. Review and turn on. Great. Now, here's where the magic happens. We're going to go into our settings here. We're going to go to properties, and we're going to create a new property, total score. And this field type is going to be a calculation. And here we're going to insert the property ICP fit. And then we're going to subtract the negative fit. And then that is going to give us our total score. So that is why we wanted to add to the negative, not subtract. So if my ICP fit was 5 and my negative score was 10, then I'll have an output of -5. And now it's going to behave more like the old score was behaving, where I can end in a negative score, or more importantly, I can take away from other scores using the negative score. So if you are looking at multiple scores on your properties, this might be something to consider that'll behave a little bit more closely to the old scores. A couple of things to keep in mind is really think through those negative scores as well as those exclusions. I really like the option now to create an exclude people from scoring. However, and this is true with your negative scores too, just think through like what's the right placement, what's the right balance. For me, for example, I'm not necessarily never going to work with someone from Australia, but the purpose of lead scoring tends to be to prioritize leads. And for me, because of that time difference, I might not prioritize a lead from Australia as much as I would a lead from my time zone. So just think through some of that stuff as you're putting this together and as you're considering, should this be a negative score or should this be a exclusion? And it's really going to depend on your business and your needs as a business and as your sales team. And definitely always communicate with your sales team if you can to discuss what is the right balance there. Those are the major changes. This was definitely one that I wasn't expecting. So once I started building this out, it's something that came up. And since I had even built quite a few scores before I even noticed it, because I was leveraging that new exclusion, it was something that I definitely wanted to share with you all. I know that originally the new scoring tool here didn't include the option to subtract points. It was only add. The purpose of that was because they added this exclusion. So if you didn't know, they have added the option to subtract points as well. So I think it's important to know that that is now a feature. So keep that in mind. As a reminder, some things that you would put in negative scores. There are going to be things like job titles not a fit, unsubscribes, bounced emails, or maybe they filled out a form that is a negative form. Also, if you're using personas, you might have George likes to call these negative personas. You might have those. If you're using those, then those might be negative scores or they might be exclusions. It's just going to depend on your business and how negative is that. So just consider that as well. So when you're rebuilding, just keep this in mind as well. And generally, when you are rebuilding, I am trying not to just rebuild as is. Like I mentioned, the old score was basically a fit score. We do now have the option for engagements scores and time-based scores, so keep that in mind. That is all I have for you today. Thank you for joining today's session of Lead Score Mondays. Negative scoring might seem like a small change, but it can have a huge impact on how you segment and prioritize your leads, especially if you're relying on automated handoff or lead routing logic. If you're transitioning away from the old scoring tool before the August 31st sunset, now is the time to rethink some of that logic. I'll continue to bring you some resources on lead scoring, so make sure you're following along. You won't want to miss it. In the meantime, if you have questions, drop them in the comments or shoot me a DM. And if you want to collaborate on a future session, I'd love to chat. See you soon.